Hi, everybody, and welcome to Grow Great Live. I'm your host, Ria Lala, and with me today, of course, is Antonia Dodge and Mariana Pollock. And today we're talking about labeling kids. And we're going to talk about why do we label kids, and what are the costs, and maybe there's even some benefits in labeling a kid. So we're going to explore all of that. We're also going to talk about what we can do if we've already found ourselves labeling our kids so that we can start to heal and fix that situation if we need to. So let's get started. Antonia, what do you think? Why do we label children? And how does it show up? Like, how does it show up from your experience?
This is a world that I live in because I do personality psychology, and one of the biggest criticisms against personality type is that you're putting everybody in a box. And so I've had to really ask myself and deconstruct this concept of labeling and really go into the root source of why do we label and what's the psychology behind labeling, not just children, but like people in general. And what I came to realize is that we all label people all the time. It's what we do. And the reason why we do that is because humans are super complex, right? Like, we're just massively complex on this ridiculous level where, I mean, we're just trying to figure ourselves out, and we live inside our own brains. And so if we're trying to engage with another person and we're trying to figure them out, we end up just naturally oversimplifying that person based on their behaviors or what we see of them. Like, we can't really get inside and deconstruct all those little parts inside of them. And so because it's an overwhelming amount of data just to learn one person intimately, and there's like 7 billion people on the planet, we just naturally do what our brain does when there's an overwhelming amount of information, and we start putting them in compartments, right? We start labeling, we start putting them basically in folders, mental folders, in order to manage that ridiculous amount of data. So we come into the world just naturally doing that anyway. And when we have children, our children are complex, not just because they're like a new set of, individual complexities, but because they're changing so often. Every time we think we got a hold of them, every time we think we know what's going on, 6 months later, like, they're totally different. I've probably personality typed to my daughter at this point like 5 different types. Now, I recognize she's a toddler, so there's really going to be no definitive statement on her type until she gets older. But what I realized is that she just changes so often that what's already an overwhelming amount of information now becomes just unmanageably difficult. It's just unmanageable. And so we slap a label on our kid because that's manageable. We go, okay, so that one's the smart one, right? Because that's the one consistent thing I'm seeing from them. Whether they're acting like a total sweetheart or they're like the next incarnation of Hitler, they're always smart, regardless. And so that's the smart one. We end up just finding one consistency in our child that we can latch onto to go, I know my kid, I understand my kid. They're not so over complex. Because I think if we just really sat with the complexity of people in general and with our children, we might get to a point where it's not just overwhelming, but it's like scary. Like, what do I do with this person that I don't really know them well enough to know if I'm doing the right thing? And being a parent is already a scary thing, and I'm already second guessing all of my choices, and I'm already not really sure if that was the right discipline for that kid, or what should I be doing here? So we just cut all that out and go, you're the smart one, and I'm going to think of you as the smart one. And so I think that's the etymology of why we label. We label because it's a way of managing the overwhelm of information that our children represent to us.
Mariana, what do you think? Why do you think we label our kids?
Totally. I totally agree with Antonia. That was a great explanation of why we do it. It's our brains process so much information on a daily basis on so many topics and so many people and everything. And, brain naturally looks for ways to make it easier on itself and on us as well. So if we can find a way to compartmentalize, things and people and children, then we totally look for that. And it also shows a little bit of a surface level of knowledge. Sometimes when we don't know something, we judge it, or we slap a label as soon as we have a minimum information on it, just so we don't have to think about it or go deeper or understanding deeper, especially with the people that we meet. Oh, he's a nice person. Or, they have a pretty good behavior and things like that. And then we do that sometimes with the children, especially if they're changing too much, because we don't know, not don't know, but we sometimes don't even have time to look deeper. And it's a very surface level of understanding a person. It's just easier to slap a label on them. So if we take, like Antonia said, if we take a little bit of a more time to go and ask why. Just get curious about it and see, curious about our children or another person, and see what they're more about. Then, we will discover that there's more, than just the label that there is to it.
Yeah, I think that I think I agree with all of you. I think the reason why parents attach label, but it's not just parents, it's everybody, is because people as a whole are meaning makers. We have a deep, deep desire to create meaning out of everything. That's why I said in previous shows, that's why people can see Jesus in a piece of sliced cheese, right? They find Jesus in their toast. It's because I want to see something there, not because it necessarily is there. And in our deep desire to create meaning, we find comfort in it. So when we see a child's behavior that we can't explain and we put some meaning to it, that can be very soothing for the parents. You can go, oh, I can explain that. Whether it's good or bad, because if it's a good behavior, then the parent can go, oh yeah, they're a leader. They're not a follower. They're a great observer. So the parent gets a hit, but it's in their desire to create meaning. And certainly if it's behavior that they can't understand or they feel is suboptimal, having a label helps them soothe themselves by creating that meaning as to where it came from and where that's attributed to. Okay, so we know that people create labels. It happens without us even thinking sometimes, and we have to really bring our consciousness to it. But what about the real repercussions that happen as a parent when we start to create labels on our children? What's the cost of it? Antonia, start us off with that.
So there's different kinds of labels that we put on our kids. We put generic, general labels like the smart one, the funny one, the pretty one. We'll put some generic labels on our children. And then there's more sort of diagnostic labels that we'll put on our kids. Things like ADD or autistic or, whatever it is. And it feels like the generic labels are, sort of neutral. It's okay to call them the smart one because that's like a positive trait, and so those are not considered to be terribly harmful. And the diagnostic ones, the ADD or autistic, etc., those labels seem to be like medicinal, right? Like they're actively helpful because then I know what's wrong with my kid. I know why he's not behaving the way that I want him or her to behave. So there's different kinds of categories of labels that we put on kids, and I think each one of them comes with its own sneaky problems. The generic ones we put on our kids, actually, I think if I was just going to turn this into an overarching principle, the biggest problem that we have when we put any sort of diagnostic or generic label on our children is that we're now telling them, like we're giving them a template to follow. We're saying, I've decided, and I'm basically God for you because you came from my womb, and as far as you know, I'm your source of life, and you are biologically programmed to see everything that I do as the thing you need to be following, and you're going to slurp up all of my worldviews, you're going to take my word as gospel, like everything that I say is going to be absolutely like that's your worldview. And now I'm telling you the limitations of your world. I'm telling you what the world is expecting of you. So if you're the smart one, the world requires you to be smart all the time. And if you're not smart all the time, then what's wrong with you? Now we have a problem. If you're the funny one, if you're not funny all the time, if you have an authentic emotion that does not include humor, what's wrong with you? The world has given you your role, and now you have to accept it. And that includes the diagnostic labels, the labels like, you have ADD. Okay, well, now you have a get out of jail free card, and everything that you do can be sort of, like charted back to this problem you have in which you are in some way broken, and that's why you're not behaving the way that other people want you to behave, and that's your get out of jail free card, and or that's your glass ceiling. That is your built-in limitation. And so the biggest danger of this is that the kid does not know that these labels are not, like they don't realize that they're just a helpful way for their parent to manage the complexity that is them. They believe that this is gospel truth. And so they'll do everything they can to confirm this bias back to their parent. Because the number one thing that we don't want to do is disappoint our parents. We want their approval. And a lot of times we'll attach following the label with getting the parents' approval, because they're the God that spoke this out loud. So we want to mirror back to them the reality that they just spoke. And if we don't do that, you know, will they be a just God or will they be an angry God, right? Like, if I don't mirror back the reality to them, are they going to be upset with me, or are they going to, or is that going to be okay? And kids don't know that. They don't know the distinction. So one of the biggest problems with labels is that you are generically creating a set of borders and boundaries around your kid that may not have anything to do with how they see themselves. It may not have anything to do with their authentic expression, but they'll shoehorn their identity into the identity that you gave them. They'll shoehorn it. They'll make sure it fits because they don't want to disappoint you. So in sort of a, that's not a very specific way, but in sort of a zoomed out way, I think that that's probably one of the biggest dangers of labeling your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at it from the, if you look at it from the perspective of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, one of the postulates says that if you judge or label somebody, you immediately lose the opportunity and ability to influence them, to help them, to just guide them in, you know, in case of the kids. So when we do label our children, as parents, we just lose that opportunity to guide them through life in a more meaningful way, in a more deeper way. And that's the problem that shows up for the parent, right? So if I label my kid as a mature one, for instance, and I'm using this example because I've seen that in the one of the members of the family. She was, from the teenage years, everybody kept saying, "You're so mature, you're so mature, you're so mature," only for her to, about age of 20 or 21, I don't remember precisely, make a very immature decision. And all of a sudden, everybody was so surprised that she made an immature decision. And, you know, it almost came like a disappointment, in which, you know, it was very hard for her to bear. So if you look at, you know, that's the problem from the parent's perspective. We do it, and then the child relaxes into it. You know, when we said, "Oh, you're the smart one," or "You're the pretty one," or "You're the funny one," or, you know, even if it's a positive, it still could be have a negative effect. The child relaxes into that label, and it doesn't really try to grow more out of it. You know, "Oh, well, I'm a smart one," or, "Well, I'm a pretty one." And then when the world, in some instances, shows them, or the society around them, or, you know, the environment as it is, shows them that that might not be the case, you know, it just comes with a dose of disappointment. So, you know, I would say be very careful about it. It's bound to be a disappointment at one point, that you realize that you're not the smartest one, or the prettiest one, or the smartest one, or, you know, any type of that.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on something that you just said, Mariana, that you know, when a child is labeled with a positive quality, and they're always seen with this positive quality, because we might think there's no, you know, drawback in saying that they're a leader, or that they're really, they get their work done, or they're a real, you know, finisher, completer, whatever label you want to use. But does it allow the child to have room for the entire spectrum of emotion? Because we already live in a very biased world of smile for the picture, don't cry, it's okay, that they can feel sad, that they can feel quiet, that they can feel angry, and not feel that they're not living up to something or falling short in their god and goddesses, like their parents' eyes, and how they even view themselves. So that conscientiousness about, even if it's a positive, just to highlight, even if it's a positive label, what does that tell your children about how they're seen and how they see themselves? You know, there's a line that I use with my kids all the time, which they now repeat back to me, but it's that your words become your world. And I'm sure we've heard some context of that before. But whatever you say and put out into the world is what you experience and what you become. And the other little part about that is, I speak to a lot of parents on coaching calls, and I'm very aware sometimes, only because I hear children in the background, that they're speaking to me about experiences where their children are in the vicinity. And their children, it doesn't matter if they're playing a video game, it doesn't matter if they're playing Lego in the corner, they are always listening. I mean, we have enough evidence that they've got spider sense. Their antennas are always up, and they can feel the emotion just from the energy in the room, far more a conversation that they're having with a friend while you're at the park, or you're having with a coach on a phone call. And so they may come up as labels, but these are things that are being peppered all around. And I really just have something that just really stuck with me. Oprah was talking about she went to Maya Angelou's party. And at Maya Angelou's party, you know, there's all kinds of big wigs there. And she says that Maya Angelou asked somebody to leave that was saying things that were just suboptimal. You know, I can't remember what it was, but it was something negative. And she wasn't mean about it. She just said, okay, you'll have to go now. And so Oprah is showcasing her shock that Maya Angelou is asking somebody who got invited to the party to leave. And when Oprah asked Maya Angelou, why did you do that? She said, whenever somebody comes in an environment and puts like labels and their ideas that in any way can bring down the space, you have to see it as if something is sticking to the furniture, something is sticking to the walls. And in this case, what we're talking about is something is sticking to your children. And it's a really great visual to get, that my words are sticking like barnacles on my children and weighing them down. And you might even perceive it as a positive barnacle, but the truth is once that's understood in the context of they don't have room for other emotions and other allowances for that to come into their broad spectrum of emotion, that can weigh them down too. So if parents could take on that visual that things are sticking to them and that their antennas are always up and always listening, I think that could be quite useful. But what I'd love to know is, I mean, we all have brothers and sisters. So Antonia, tell me about what your experience has been with labeling. You touched upon that. What was your label, and how did it play out with even your brothers and sisters and in the context of your parents? Because that's kind of fascinating.
Mm-hmm. So I'm the youngest of three kids, and my brother was almost 9 years older than me. My sister was 6 years older than me. And so I was, the first word that I can remember being called was caboose. I was the caboose. I was the end of the train. I was the tag along. I was the totally unexpected kid, which had some, I never took it negatively, but that was the first thing I remember, is that I was like this tag along. So I think that informed a bit of how I saw myself in the family dynamic. The other thing is that my brother was labeled as the smart one, to a point that I think it was actually very harmful for him. If he didn't automatically figure something out, if it didn't come easily to him, because he was told all the time that everything came so easily to him, if it didn't, he would abandon it. And he would just go, well, I can't do that activity even if I want to, because if it's not natural for me, then I'll lose my label of the smart one. This will be contradicting my label. And of course, all of this was completely unconscious for him. He was a kid. And by the time I came online, he was a teenager. And so he just, like, if things didn't come easy, he would just abandon them. So there was all sorts of opportunities for learning that he chose not to pursue because he didn't want to contradict the label that had been given him. He didn't really form a work ethic until he got into his 20s. And that was really tough for him. He had a really hard time finding himself. He had a really hard time building a work ethic. And so even though he was super smart, it was really difficult for him to actually find something that he wanted to do because everything had come so easily, and he was trying not to contradict the label of everything comes easily to me. He did eventually get a work ethic that was amazing, and now he's an extremely successful writer, which is fantastic for him, but it took him a long time to get there. He didn't publish his first book until he was in his 40s, where he could have easily done that, early in his life. My sister had an even worse experience because she was labeled as two things. She was labeled as the pretty one, and she was also labeled as the wounded bird. Like, my mom literally said, she's my wounded bird in front of her. So she had this image of brokenness that she carried throughout her entire life. Now, she died in her early 30s of a seizure, and she was just starting to get her life together. Like, she always saw herself as broken. She ended up developing epilepsy, very, very powerful, relatively debilitating epilepsy at 18, which just confirmed the bias that she was broken somehow, not only on an emotional way, but now in a physical way. And she just always thought of herself as broken. I'm broken, I'm broken, I'm broken. And when my mom said wounded bird, I think my mom meant that affectionately, like she needed more of my mom's nurturing, and that was my mom's way of, I mean, it may have been unconsciously manipulative, but I think it was more like my mom wanted to see herself as a nurturing mother that took care of her children no matter what the situation was. And if she had a wounded bird, this was my mom, like being able to nurture a wounded bird. I think it was very much about my mom's image of herself, which is generally what happens when we label. It's a reflection of how we want to see ourselves in some way. If we have a smart one kid, that means we want to think that we had smart kids. If we have a wounded bird, it means that we want to think of ourselves as like the long-suffering mother that will attend to the wounded bird. And my labels were a little bit more all over the place because I had like 4 big people labeling me. My sister's label of me was spoiled brat. My brother called me larva from the time that I was really young, really young, because I was like this little, I was like the caboose. I was the caboose, the larva, the spoiled brat. But to my parents, I was the charming one. So of all those labels, the best one was the charming label. I was going to go for that one, right? And so in order to offset all these other labels that I had been given by older siblings and parents in different contexts, I was going to attach to the charming one. So I just put all my eggs in the charming basket. I was going to be charismatic. I was going to come and be like super fun and funny and awesome, and everybody would want to hang out with me. And that was actually me fleeing the other labels. If I'm charming enough, maybe I won't be considered a spoiled brat. If I'm charming enough, maybe I won't be considered a caboose or a larva or whatever. It's like I can attach to that one. And that was nice because in some ways it helped me build the skill of charisma, and at the same time it was also massively limiting because if I wasn't charismatic for some reason, if I didn't show up feeling very good to a party, I was not allowed to do that. Because what if the charisma label gets taken away, now all the other labels are there and they're terrible, right? So I've got to double down on charisma. I have to double down on charisma because I don't want to double down on spoiled brat. I don't want to double down on larva. I want to double down on charisma. So it's really, I think in this conversation about labels, it just dawned on me, we should also probably be very conscientious of the labels our children are giving to each other, the siblings are giving to each other, because that's also a label that kids are going to feel like they have to show up doing. My older siblings were they were enough older than me that they looked like adults to me. Like when my brother was saying really stupid shit as a teenager that completely framed my life, he was like 14 or 15, but he seemed like an adult. He seemed like he had it figured out because I was just like a 6-year-old. So if we have sibling relationships too and dynamics, I think we also need to be conscientious of the labels they're giving to each other, because I think those are just as powerful for each other, not just the parental label. Experience of being labeled in my family.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's so great. Mariana, tell us about who were you?
Well, I'm an only child, so all that extra, all that extra,
spoiled and narcissistic.
Right.
Those are never my labels, believe it or not, because I had a tough life. Anyways, all that extra label happy energy, they couldn't go around, to extra siblings, right? It all was concentrated on me.
All got dumped on you.
All on me. And it was quite different, though. It was quite different from, my parents, because my dad had this presupposition that I'm capable of learning anything and everything, and he can teach me everything and anything. And later on, I realized that was actually him putting a label of resourcefulness on me, that I'm a resourceful one, which actually played out really good, afterwards in my life, because, it did create a little bit of extra pressure, because, if I can't figure it out in the moment, how to make something out of, anything, they will be like, well, I am the resourceful one. I have to, figure it out. And I generally hung out with him more, and I've learned, many more things that, I would if, I was hanging out more with my mom. Now, and he was not a traditional man. He's not. On the other hand, my mom is a traditional woman, and a homemaker and a mom and all of that. She had all a sets of labels on me, which will be a homemaker, a good wife, a good mother, smart, not so much pretty, but, all around like a very proper, wife and all of that. And she very early figured out that I'm none of that. I mean, unless she saw that in me, and she then turned the corner around thinking that she will inspire me to become that by telling me that I am not. She will say, you will never be a good wife. You will never be a good cook, because, you don't want to learn anything. You just want to go, hang out with your father in your garage, and, you will never get married, or even if you do, your husband will have to work, for you, or he will have to pay homemakers to do it for you. And and the thing is that I don't know, maybe because I wasn't as connected to her, or deep down I didn't believe that that's true. Those kind of words and those kind of labels that she was putting on me, whether in a positive or a negative way, didn't really affect me. I guess I chose to believe that deep down I knew that I am going to grow up to be smart, and I am going to grow up to have a great family, and a great husband, and be all those things that she wanted me to be. So that being said, though, I kept thinking about maybe children who don't know that deep down, or they don't have that belief deep down that anything, no matter what, they're going to turn out to be okay, and how will that affect them. So it was an interesting dynamic. And but my dad did have one label for me. It was that she's a talker. He will say, oh yeah, she's a talker, and it was like, okay, so just talk less, work more, things like that. But my grandfather, my father's father, he actually told him very early, because I probably mentioned that before, that I grew up in Europe, in Serbia, former Yugoslavia, and they never saw it coming. But my grandfather told my parents one day, he said, you know what? And I was young, I was not even high school. He said, this child does not belong here. She will go far, and if you please be careful with her, how you talk to her and how you raise her and everything, because she will just go turn and not even turn around. She will leave. She belongs somewhere else. And they were like, oh, shut up, what are you talking about? And he's like, yep, she's a goner. So I was a goner, which turned out to be true. So yeah, that's my story. Ria. You had siblings.
Oh yeah, well I have three, including and me. I will say this: my family, my parents were very conscientious, and it's something that we've discussed in the family context. Very conscientious from a very early age to not use labels. So my father was the one who led that, and I never can recall him once saying something specific about my sister, my younger sister, or my younger brother. However, two things that I want to just make a point of here is he can have a, he can ensure that that's not happening out of his mouth and even out of my mom's through talking to him about the cost of that. But remember, we have lots of extended family. They have brothers and sisters. And then what happens when they start making their own determination based on how someone's speaking, how someone's presenting, how they've done in class, who's helping in the kitchen, which neither one of us did, but my younger sister would help in the kitchen. And so it's almost like a natural thing that started to emerge about, Annie, who'd spent a lot of time talking about really philosophical ideas with my dad, and that was like right up his alley. So the point I'm trying to make is when he's sitting there, even though I never felt left out, it was always like I could jump in there and talk about it, and I would. But did I already recognize that there's like really lofty ideas that they might be talking about that I'm not really in right now? Remember, my sister's older than I am, and there's something that's occurring to me as a child, which I wasn't conscious of then, that there is a label that's being presented without words. You present labels based on your children sitting around a kitchen table and who your eye is focusing on. We touched a bit about this on our last call, but who are you focusing on? Like right now, I mean, I have two children, and both of them, I mean, I think it's hard to talk about this without kind of mentioning that children, especially siblings, they're in competition for the parents' attention, and they're trying to figure out, who am I in the context of this family? So that is emerging, that's competing with the labels too. And around the table, depending on the age, depending on the interest, where I direct my attention is going to help create the label just simply. So basically, there were labels that were created with consciously trying not to create a label, but they're just emerging. One thing that I really liked about my father is if he ever saw an auntie or an uncle mention something to do with a label, he instantly put them in their place. And it's something that I've been conscious of as well, as I have friends or I have family that come around. If they are going to say something in the vicinity of my children, to be very aware of that I have two children, very aware of who they're looking at and very aware that they're not putting on a label simply because I don't want them to have that. So I'm going to give you one. My young son, he is such a huge eater, and I mean, he really could eat more than my husband, but he's not, you know, he's a healthy looking boy, but he's 8. And the fact that he can eat so much, so you know, we have this, you know, we always tell him, Hara Hachibu, eat till you're 80%, don't go over 80%, you're good, you have enough. But, you know, everybody would observe that he's a big eater because you take him anywhere and he's ordering, he wants to order off the adult menu, which we let him. And then people just notice that and they start saying, oh, you know, Luke loves to eat. He loves to eat. He always finishes his food. Wow, Luke's a big eater. But while there's nothing like physically different about Luke, like he's just, you know, a very active, healthy boy, what are the long-term repercussions of anyone just saying that? The fact that Luke always finishes all his food, or he's a big eater. Luke can eat as much as my husband. Will he interpret that somehow that isn't useful for him in the future? So when I started to notice that people outside of the family started to mention that, it was something that I let go probably, you know, probably for a year. I made a point of saying, hey, can we, on the down low, can you make sure that you do not say that in front of the children? And I said it in a really nice way, and there's a way to relay that. So one thing that we'd want to convey is, you know, it's not just us creating the labels, it's outside family that's creating these labels. In my family, do we have, like, Annie still, I think, if you ask me, is still considered the smart one. But not so much with my parents, because I can't attach myself to anything obvious that my parents said, but just the fact that Annie's always talking about crazy ideas that I'm not necessarily bringing to the table. So I've created this label myself, and it's maybe I've become a shopaholic for it because I'm seeing that. I know that Sasha's going to help my mom when it's Christmas time, so I know that I'm not going to be in the kitchen helping her. Annie definitely doesn't even know how to turn on the stove, so it's not going to be Annie. So that's what she is. She's the one who helps mom, and she's the one you can count on. So there's so many ways that labels come into the mix, whether your parents are actually saying them, whether they're conscious of them, it might be coming from outside family. But first of all, and we'll talk about more about this when how we can mitigate this and what we can do, but just to be wary of all the different avenues that it comes in, because it's not necessarily just in the words that we speak. Now, Antonia, I know that you're a personality expert. I know that from a personality standpoint, there's probably some really great information that we'll have questions on, and I'd like to know, but what do you have to say about labels as it relates to personality types or typing or any of that?
What you just mentioned is so interesting. This concept of labeling without words. Now, one of the things that you have to remember when you're talking about words is words themselves are labels. They're representations of reality. They're not actual reality. And so every word we speak is in and of itself a label to try to organize the world around us and communicate what we're seeing. So words in and of themselves are labels, and that kind of makes it so that we're not talking about like never, ever, ever, ever label your children. It's more be aware of how labeling works, and so when it's coming up, you can maybe catch some of the negative repercussions. But just, you know, just saying, like, I tell my daughter, she's beautiful every day. You are beautiful. Like, and I have no problem saying that to her. I want to reinforce this over and over. Beautiful is a label, but that's one that I want to reinforce. I want to reinforce that she's beautiful. When she puts on makeup and people say, oh, look how pretty you are, one of the things I say is, can we not say she looks pretty with makeup on? Can we say, because like she'll just put like lipstick, like lip gloss on just to, because it's so weird how biology makes us like want makeup even when, you know, as girls, even when we're 2 years old. But she's putting like lip gloss on and people say, oh, you look so pretty. And I'll say, can we actually say she looks fancy? Because I want her to know she's pretty without it. But when she puts it on, she looks fancy, right? Like now she's fancying herself up. To me, it's a label to say you look pretty with makeup. I want her to understand that she does not need that makeup to look pretty. She's beautiful all the time. So beautiful, pretty, these are labels. Fancy is a label. These are all ones that I'm comfortable with because I want her to be able to step into a place of just not having to worry about that. Like I'm not going to myopically obsess over my appearance because that's handled. When it comes to personality types, though, when we talk about like nonverbal labels, you were mentioning that like your older sister is the one that will talk about philosophical concepts, and your younger sister is the one that's going to help out in the kitchen. And I'm sure that you have a place like that. I'm sure your other sibling, your brother, right? You have a brother?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. is probably fitting in there somewhere too. And what's great about not assigning these but letting them organically happen is that when it comes to personality types, the point of them is not to go, oh, you're a blah, 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 so therefore you need to be doing this. It's more like, oh, you're doing this, that's interesting. Are you doing it because of how your brain is wired? And if your brain is wired that way and you find that to be very satisfying, can we make sure that you have opportunities in front of you to continue to pursue how your brain is naturally wired as opposed to forcing you into something that isn't as natural? Mm-hmm.
Antonia, can you give a specific example? So like an example of how that would play out and then how a parent might interpret something. So yeah, that concept.
Well, I'm actually buds with your sister Sasha, your younger sister Sasha. So I actually have the advantage of knowing her personality type. Sasha is in the Myers-Briggs system an ENFJ. That means that she's an extroverted, intuitive feeler judger. Now, if you're into personality types, you might know what I mean, and if you're not, don't worry about it.
Check it out.
But Sasha's, yeah, and actually Sasha's the same personality type as Mariana.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this is that even though Maria's like, I totally don't like to cook. What's interesting about people of this personality type is that they lead with a process that is very social, it's very connective, emotionally connective, and it tends to enjoy nurturing activities. And that can manifest in a lot of different ways. But one nurturing activity that's very common for people who lead with this mental process is cooking, right? Cooking is a way to nurture other people or to take care of household things or whatever. So the fact that Sasha just naturally gravitated towards that position or that role makes sense with her wiring. Whereas your older sister, Annie, is not an ENFJ, she's an INFP. And INFPs lead with a mental process that is more about self-reflection and being very interested in concepts of good and evil, philosophy, introspection, that sort of thing. So they're naturally going to gravitate to those positions. They're naturally going to gravitate towards the things that are intriguing to them on an intrinsic level. What personality typing does, and I would say that this is a case of if you use it right, and again, all words are labels, so we're not going to really be able to avoid it. It's being conscious and thoughtful of how it's happening. If you understand your kid's personality type, as opposed to going, you need to be doing this, whatever this, fill in the blank of whatever this is. And if you're not doing this, that means you're broken. That means you're not right. And then now we label them as not right because they're not familiar to us or they're not doing the things that we think they should be doing. If we go, their behavior is different than mine, I wonder if they're wired differently. Now we find the label of how they're wired. Oh, you're, like for me, I'm an ENTP. And so being an ENTP doesn't mean that I'm limited to being whatever a profile says an ENTP is. It's more that, oh, I'm an ENTP. That explains why I'm attracted to the things I'm attracted to. It explains why I talk the way that I talk. It explains why I love maps and models of reality or whatever. It's more diagnostic than it is prescriptive. It's not a prescription of how things should be. It's a diagnosis of why things are the way they are. And so when you have a tool of not labeling for the sake of shoehorning a kid into a position, but rather recognizing that they're going to naturally gravitate towards certain things, and if you can understand why they're doing that, and if a label helps you understand that, then that's a helpful label, right? Not all labels, it's when we shove our labels down our kids' throats that we have a problem. When we see them naturally developing and then a label helps us better that understanding, not to force them into anything, but to open our minds to different possibilities, then those labels are a little bit more helpful to work with.
So what's the simple rule of thumb that a parent or anybody could have who understands a bit of personality typing, whether they do or don't, that allows them not fall in the trap of having a personality typing, typing diagnosis, influence their children in a suboptimal way? Yeah. What can they be aware of and have in their pocket for that?
Yeah. So one thing that I mentioned over and over again with my students who are learning this is that personality types, like anything, are a tool that we can utilize if we need it. Okay, it's just a tool. It's a neutral. The easiest tool that I can think to illustrate this with is with like hammer. A hammer is a tool. You can either use a hammer to build a house, right, in a constructive way where you recognize how to use this tool in like a positive way and that you're making something, or you can use a tool to literally bludgeon somebody to death. Many people die from hammer attacks, right? So It's just a tool, and it's a tool meant to help your children become more self-expressed, more creative, more accepting, for you to be more accepting of your kid, because now it's awareness. If you recognize that your child is wired very differently than you are, you almost don't have to know how they're wired. If you just know they're wired differently, that just gives you a whole blast of awareness to go, oh, they're probably going to behave different than me too. So when they're behaving differently, you don't automatically assign other labels like disobedient, disrespectful, broken, like not listening, right? Like if they behave in a way that is not recognizable to you or familiar to you, it's not that they're being rebellious. It's that they're just manifesting what's already, inside of them. So if you use typology or any tool for a greater understanding of how the mind works, if you use it to open things up, to open your frames up, to be more accepting, now you're using it in a positive way. If you use it as a tool to bludgeon with, if you use your hammer to beat it over the head, like, well, you're this type, and therefore you should be doing this and you're not, or anything that's closing things in, anything that's constricting, anything that's like forcing an ideal, or doing a make wrong, like you say, anytime it's like using an understanding of types to do a make wrong, now your tool is now you're using it to harm your child as opposed to open things up for them.
So maybe a question from that parents can ask is, and we'll get more into some things that we can do to mitigate this in a bit, but a question that parents can ask is, since we know that every word that we use creates a label, because words can create labels, is the label that I am putting out there to my child or in the space, does that allow for their greatest growth and development? Does it allow for their greatest expansion? Does it allow for their greatest self-expression? That type of question, and really kind of sinking into, because there might be a lot of work that each parent is doing, that we are doing to kind of figure out what's funneling that and where's it coming from. It's in our blind spots and it's in our unconscious. So that might be a harder question to understand why we're doing it. But if as words leave our mouths, we ask, I just put something into the space. Is this something that allows for their greatest expansion and growth, that we give them room to grow into anything? And if the answer is yes, then go for it. If the answer is no, then don't. Think about it, because then maybe there's some work that I have to do here, and that's much more work. That might be years of work, but we can't get there, and we don't want to wait or make our kids wait that long. So that might be a useful question. Yeah. Anyone?
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to call on Mariana, because Mariana knows way more neurolinguistic programming than I do, NLP. But I took a little bit of NLP courses, and I'll hand this over to Mariana after because I'm sure she can flesh out this concept. But one of the most powerful things that I learned from those courses was this concept of nominalization, where we turn a verb into a noun. Nominalization is basically like whenever we make something static that isn't static. Like the word smart, in the moment somebody acted smart, so we can say that person is smart, but that has just frozen this concept of smart in like a time capsule. Like it is nominalized or turned into something into a noun that is actually a verb. And if you want to stop labeling in a way, and it's going to sound weird and awkward as you say it, but if you want to stop labeling, you stop nominalizing things. You stop freezing them in time. What you do is you turn them back into a verb. So you make it an action. So instead of I'm smart or you're smart, I'm smarting and you're smarting, right? Well, I mean, I guess smarting is a word that actually means that you're have a welt, so that might not be a good example. But something like, beautiful. I am beautifuling, right? I am in the act of being beautiful or having beauty. You are beautifuling, right? And you stop making it like this label that you stick on the kid and they have to run with for the rest of their life, and it's more like in this moment, this is what you're manifesting to the world.
It's a difference between saying, so I understand, it's a difference between saying you are generous and the child goes, oh, that's who I am, I'm generous, versus you were very generous when you share those crackers with a friend. The difference is one is an act, verb, and one is that is who you are. That's the difference. Mariana, jump in.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about that, and another thing that Antonia mentioned, which I'll get to. When you tell them you're smart, yes, they're going to think they're smart. If you want to also extend it and go one step further, you can say that was a very smart decision that you made. Or you approach that conversation very passionately. You must feel very passionate about so and so or such and such subject. So turning it, catching yourself into, like Antonia said, making it a constant, turning it into a flowy kind of type of thing. And I guess that's a good way for parents also, to be on their toes, how they look at, not just their children, but themselves and the outer world as well. So another word that you were, Antonia, were mentioning was the behavior. So another law, if you will, of NLP is that people are not their behaviors. So if people, let's say somebody says he's an angry person, that doesn't have to be right. Sometimes it is. If they're like angry all the time, and that's, we put the label on them that they're angry. However, they're exhibiting an angry behavior or angry behavior. And that's where we go into the curiosity mode and try to realize, why are they behaving this way? Are they standing up for something? It could be like, I know that when my children act up, if you will, I know that they're standing up for something. And just this past couple of weeks, I was realizing that they're acting up because they were standing up for consistency, which I was demanding of them, but I wasn't providing it, for myself and for them as well. But I wanted them to be consistent, but at the same time, I was wavering through whatever project that I had. And then I realized that that's what they're doing. I want them to consistently exhibit good behavior while I am not doing the same, but I'm requesting that of them. And that's when they started acting up. And it was a pretty good, revelation for myself. But always realizing that the people are not their behavior. I know that's it's a little bit in a friction with what you were saying with the wiring, but just to remember that the personality type, how you are doing it, Antonia, and everything. I think there's nothing better than how to understand why the certain behaviors are coming up, because you could be exhibiting different behaviors even within your type. So when your child is exhibiting certain kind of behavior in the moment, that's when we consciously as parents need to pause in perception and think, okay, so she is acting angry, or he is being manipulative, or whatever the behavior is happening, and realize where is that coming from in this range, in this certain situation, or whatever led up to that moment, and realize where is that coming from. And then in that moment, with a conscious, we make a conscious decision to be conscious about it. So when they're exhibiting a certain behavior, whatever that may be, and we consciously pause in perception and realize what has led up to that point, up to that behavior, we can actually address it in a way that is going to be more meaningful and faster and better for us and for the child.
Good stuff. This topic is so fascinating. I realized that I just want to go back really quickly, because I didn't actually mention who I was actually in the context of the family. And who I was in the family was the responsible one. Because Annie would leave, the iron on and all the lights on and the door unlocked, but I was the one who was meant to save the house and ensure that the younger kids, Sash and Sean, were safe. And that still, shows up today. I, became mother hen and drove my younger brother and sister crazy. Okay, so, all right, we've covered a lot of ground on this. There will be parents who are listening to this going, feeling a lot of anxiety right now, thinking, man, I've used labels left, right, and center. I've talked to about my kids in front of my girlfriend and used labels, and what are the repercussions? So we've talked about the repercussions, but what are the repercussions for them long term? So let's get into a dialogue of what a parent can do if this has already occurred, and what they can do to start to mitigate it, to heal it, to handle it if they found themselves in a situation where they're stressed out right now. So Antonia, take it away. Start us off.
I'm not sure if this is the absolute highest leverage way to sort of send the message to your kid that the label is not permanent. But one of the things that I've done especially with my stepsons, is that my older stepson, his name is Gunnar, and the kid is like, I mean, he's so intuitive. He just spots things that people 3 times his age don't see. And so he keeps getting this message over and over and over again that he is just brilliant, right? Like everybody tells him he's brilliant. Everybody says like, and they've got this expectation on him to just be so smart and figure things out and such a problem solver, and he's so brilliant. And one of the things I've taken to doing with Gunnar, because, I mean, I see maybe 20, 25% of his life, is I always make sure to tag on the end, because I don't want to tell him he's not those things. He is. He's really smart. He's really brilliant. But I always tack on the end, but it's okay if you're not. I just go, I'm like, dude, you are so, I mean, we'll play Portal 2. I don't know if you've ever heard Portal 2. It's a video game that's we play two-person. I'm 37 years old, and the kid is just turning 9, right, in a few days. And he gives me a run for my money. Like, he and I are figuring this thing out together, and he is, like, pattern recognizing like crazy, and it is amazing. And he'll figure something out. I'll look at him, I'll just be like, dude, that was incredible. You have such amazing pattern recognition. I was like, you are so intuitive. And then I'll always add to the end, but it's okay if at some point you're not. It's okay if, like, you're not that every moment. I'll see my stepson Sawyer. He's more of a builder. He loves Legos and Lincoln Logs, and he'll build these incredible, like, he'll follow their instructions, and he'll make this incredible, like, Lego thing. And I'll come and I'll be like, dude, you just followed those instructions amazing. I can't read instructions like that. But it would have been okay if you didn't do that too. It would have been okay if you just freeform something. And so everything is given this modifier of, it's okay if you don't follow the template. Like, this is how I see you right now, but it's okay if you're not like that all the time. And I'm not sure if that's I'm sure you guys will have absolutely brilliant suggestions on this, but that's my one thing that I do to try to mitigate all this. With Piper, I tell her she's so beautiful, she's so pretty, and I don't ever want to say anything to the effect of indicating that she's not going to be beautiful for the rest of her life. But anytime I praise her, I always just kind of go, but it's okay if you, like, I mean, she's 2.5 at this point, so I'm not really saying it's okay if you wake up not looking amazing. But that's kind of, that's the message I want to give, is like, if you're not at your best all the time, that's okay. And who's to say that that's not being at your best? Who's to say that that's not just an arbitrary concept of what being at your best is? So it's this modifier I tag on the end of everything. It's okay if you're not that thing all the time. That's all right. It's going to be fine. And I think that gives them this concept of, like, yeah, I am mostly like this, but I also have the freedom that if I'm not like that, it's not like the world is going to collapse around me. It's not like I'm going to be disappointing every person who ever lived. It's not like, the sun is going to go up in flames if I'm not this thing all the time.
Mariana.
Love that. That is so cute. I'm going to use that. I like it. But it's okay if you're not. The one thing that as we grow up, and become adults, one thing that we totally, grow out of as well is the curiosity effect. And just being curious, like, little children, like when they see something or they hear something, wow, I wonder how that works, or wow, I wonder why is that happening? Can you explain that to me? So I think that one thing that we can do is get curious about our children. That's one, it's the most important word, you acted in this way earlier. I wonder why that happened. You can get curious through the conversation with them, or you can get curious in your mind, before you even address, what the behavior was, that, if you don't, it's going to become a label. So I think the curiosity, it's the biggest way, and you can play around with it, any way you want. I don't have a certain, way, except for, like, pausing and saying, and thinking through it. And then also assessing the behavior as it happening, I would imagine. So instead of putting a judgment on the behavior and on the child, or putting a label on the behavior or on the child, assess what kind of behavior is happening in that moment, and then look for reasons why is that happening. And then once you kind of have the reason figured out, then look for a way to address it with the child and teach them how is that. For instance, if they say, oh, he's a difficult child, and before you know it, there's a label to it from an educator, from a neighbor, from the family members and everything, that he or she is a difficult child. Now, how do we usually deal with that in at least in this country? Well, we medicate right away, right? Or we take it to a therapist or anything like that. So instead of having that, he's a difficult child, let's see what is it in their life that it's making them exhibit behavior that we as parents or them as educators perceive as difficult. Because sometimes, talking in class more than your peers doesn't mean that you're difficult. It just that means that you have things to say. That's how you're wired. You have things to say. So I think that would be my 2 cents on it. To get curious about your children, get curious about the process, get curious about how you can, not label and just assess behavior as it happening.
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about labeling, obviously, but and how subtly and unconsciously labeling occurs. One thing that I try to be highly conscious of is how do I extract, through that curiosity that you talk about, Mariana, how do I extract the purest form of thought from that child, unfettered? So how can I ask a question that allows from my facial expressions, from my nonverbal cues, my language, my tone, so that I'm getting something that is a pure thought and not whatever label or thought that I'm trying to inject in them, because my tone alone can affect a label that they're putting on themselves. Mm-hmm. So that requires some sort of self-regulation that's occurring in the parent to think about everything, their entire being, as they're asking that curious question, so that they can get a pure thought. One way that, and one way, that we can ask our children to think about labels that have already been put on them. Well, of course, the parent can ask how they see themselves, ask why they see themselves like that, what evidence is there, what makes you say those things. Again, doing your self-regulation, so there's no rebuts that are happening from the parent 5 seconds later. There's no make wrongs, there's no judgments, there's no shames. It's just pure. And that requires a parent to have self-regulation, because if a parent tells you, if a child tells the parent that I think I'm the stupid one and Fred's the smart one, a parent has to really calm their system down, calm their animal down, so they don't run into, how could you say that? Don't you know I think you're smart? Didn't I tell you how smart you were yesterday? And then all of a sudden that child just goes into shutdown mode. So I think that an important process in this, as we begin to figure out if a parent is already doing this, and we're going to ask those curious questions, we're going to ask it because we've already done our self-regulation, we've calmed our own system down, neural system down, so that we can ask the question without putting anything extra in the space. And your job is just to be an excavator. That's what a parent's job is, to excavate. You're like an archaeologist searching for a dinosaur. And if you happen to see something, you don't start screaming, it's a dinosaur, I think this is the leg. You don't say anything. You just keep asking the questions till it eventually comes out. Because I really do want their pure thought. Now, getting back to something Antonia said about the add-ons, I feel that the dominant thing, this is my own personal view, I feel that the dominant thing that people say may be the thing that the child remembers the most. So I'm running a risk, potentially, when I say something to a child, but I have the add-on. So the add-on, I feel, is definitely a good thing to have. However, bearing in mind, the child might stop at the blah, but at the end. So, when you think about praise, I couldn't help but think about, there's so much research that has been done about what happens when you praise children and how that manifests as they grow up. So always praise the effort. And in the effort of praising the effort, so I love the I am beautiful. I actually think that it's something that I want my kids to know as well, that they're beautiful. I'll tell, we'll talk about their bodies and, just so they adore themselves. But the way I've done it is not saying it to them that they're beautiful. I don't think I've ever really actually said that to them. However, with them, now your daughter's quite young, so this is something that maybe might happen in the future. But instead of me saying it, what I have done is said, okay guys, let's think about our personal mantra. And we've, in one of our family meetings, each come up with our mantra that we say. And part of theirs is, the first one is, I am beautiful, which they came up with. And I am powerful, and I can do anything, and I never give up. And there's just like 5 of them that they say every day. So it's a self-affirmation and not my affirmation of that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. They are saying that every day, and they say it with really joy and vigor. So my personal standpoint on this is, it is very I'm highly, I would almost say like highly conscious about putting any sort of direct commentary on what my children are doing, unless it has to do with the effort or it has to do with their own self-evaluation of themselves based on a well-articulated question to them. So they are constantly telling me what they think. And if they're thinking, oh, I'm not very good at that sport, or I'm not very good at this, it's my questioning that allows them to come to their own conclusion. And let them come to their own conclusion once they're at the age that they can articulate their ideas and their thoughts almost as purely as you can. So that means that, again, I have to register in my system that I'm on an excavation mission to simply try and understand their own mind. And in the process, they get an understanding of who they are because of what words they put in and almost nothing external. Now, I know I can't possibly do that because, again, there's things that are happening in my blind spots. There are things that are happening in the unconscious. There are things that the world is saying to them. But I can't control all of those things because I don't know what I don't know. I can only be on my path to as much self-awareness as I can be on until I arrive at that place. So as much as possible, my interactions with the children, so if you are somebody who may have labeled your children, get into the conversation where you're simply on an excavation mission and try and try to let your words, like almost hold your mouth back from saying everything. I just have a firm belief that if ever you're saying a statement to your children, the question should be is how can I turn that statement into a question? Because then the question will allow the child to come to their own conclusions. And then you can dig deeper with that. So the more statements that I'm giving the children is an opportunity for you to look at why did I choose to say something versus ask a question. There's not anything that I can tell my children that I can't pose in the form of a question that will allow them to come to their own conclusions, which I think is much more richer and much more conducive for their own self-development. So yeah.
Well, and that's a discipline. What you're talking about is not something that's going to automatically come to somebody. Like you're talking about a discipline that you engage in. And so if you're a person who has been currently labeling your kids, like the reason why I mentioned the add-on of and it's okay if you're not is these are kids that I don't have they're getting labeled like crazy in their current context because that's just sort of the current context they're in is people who are just trying to get by in life. Like they're just trying to get by. And so labels are a major help for them because like that's all they can do. They can just, they're just trying to figure out how to get to the next day. And so there's like the reason why I think I'm mentioning this is because if I was watching this and I was a person who had not created the discipline you're talking about or had not been on this discipline, it would feel like a really big jump to go from labeling your kids to, like making sure everything is in the form of a question. And as you are, starting that discipline for yourself, because I think it's a fantastic discipline as a parent, I think it's fantastic. As you're moving on, you can insert some dialogue in there where you go, hey, remember all those labels? I mean, you say this in a way that an 8-year-old can understand, but yeah, how mommy always says that you're the smart one or that you're so smart? I just want to let you know, and have that conversation. It doesn't even have to be an add-on. It can be a conversation. I just want to let you know that I don't think you have to be smart all the time. It probably sounds like that, and your brain right now might not understand that right now. Like you might still always try to be smart for me, and I just want to let you know that if you do something that you think is dumb, I'm gonna be okay with that. Like we'll figure it out as we go, right? Like you're allowed to.
Because I'm smart too, right?
Yeah, so exactly. Like I do dumb stuff too, so it's gonna be okay. Like just this concept of like, I know I've been saying this thing, and maybe you've been thinking that you have to do this for me, and I just want to let you know that it's gonna be okay if you're not gonna disappoint me if you don't always become that thing. And I think that's why for me, the add-on is not something that with my stepsons, it's not something that they necessarily can dismiss because it's an inconsistent message they get. It's a message that's out of frame for them. But it's okay if you're not. It's something they're not hearing every day. If you say it all the time, I think it probably will turn into white noise, especially if your actions contradict it. In particular, if your actions contradict it. I think that's the other piece of the puzzle, is not just in how we're talking to our kids, is our behavior consistent with the messaging we're giving, which is, it's okay if you're not smart all the time, but then when they do something dumb, you like lose your mind, right? You like lose your shit on them, and you're like, that's totally unacceptable, right? And so you're like, well, like it's okay if you're not smart all the time, but then the one time they're not smart, you're like, like you become Godzilla. Obviously, it's not okay then. So the other part of it is making sure that when they contradict the label you've given them, that you are conscientious and thoughtful about holding space for them in that moment, of being consistent with the message of it's okay if you're not, going, like that's what happened, so let's work through it. Let's see why you did this. Let's figure this out. And that's where Mariana's suggestion of being curious comes in. It's so hard to hold space and be curious when your kid is effed up and you're not happy and you're embarrassed maybe, or you're frustrated, or they just damaged something, like expensive or whatever it is that they did. It's so difficult. That's the moment. That's the moment when the real message will be sent of whether or not it's okay that they contradict their label, is in how you behave when they've contradicted it in action.
Yeah, and I think that we should have mentioned this at the beginning of this video, is that we're all guilty of labeling and judging at one moment or another, and I know I am. It's like Antonia said, it's a discipline, it's a path that you choose to get on, and which is not easy, and it takes patience and it takes time in order to make it better for yourself and for them, and in order to grow. And once you're on that path, some of us get addicted and you want it. And do we slip every now and then? Yes, I do. The other day I just thought of my younger son, because he uses his intelligence to get ahead and get, whatever he wants in that moment, or, down in the future. And I thought of him, I said, oh my God, what a little manipulator. And I caught myself saying that, before, several years ago. And I thought to myself, okay, if I say that in front of him, or I project that in any way, it doesn't have to be words, if I project it in any way, it would not be good for him, because he will think that he's a manipulator and he will try to get through life manipulating others, which is definitely what I don't want. So, those are the moments that you catch yourself. I just want to quickly, before we wrap up, talk about the add-ons that you guys were talking about, just from the NLP standpoint. Our conscious mind, there's an unconscious mind and the conscious mind. Conscious mind is what we do consciously on every, day, the thoughts that we're running through ourselves and into our minds and everything. The unconscious mind is, to simply explain it, is just a little motor that runs in the back that retains everything. What we can't remember consciously is unconsciously, remembered in our mind. So when it comes to add-ons or any kind of, words that we say to them, in the moment, they consciously don't have to necessarily be remembered. Unconsciously, they are stored. Sometimes they show up later, over time. We don't know when and how. Sometimes they don't. It depends. It's almost like, when like a bad guy in a movie, all of a sudden decides not to go and rob a bank for whatever reason, like the morality kicks in or anything. That could be an add-on that he is a good person or something along those lines, that maybe somebody, told him like 10 or 20 years ago. So it could be, it could show up later on. The add-on would, in life when it works, and it could not. We don't know. But I'm not against, saying that or using it. It's just, it would be cool to be around when it shows up.
I think it's the consistency of all of these things that we're talking about. It's the consistency of behavior, of having the discipline that Ria mentioned, that discipline of questions over statements. It's like all of this is talking about taking your parenting to the next level, of not just trying to we are whenever we talk about all this stuff, we are talking at a pretty high level of parenting, one that even I struggle. I mean, as the mother of a 2.5-year-old, I'm listening to myself talk, I'm listening to all of us talk, and I'm just going, shit, man, I've been calling her little Napoleon for the last 6 months, because she's in her 2s. And she just wants to take over everything, and she's at the bottom of the totem pole. It drives her crazy. So she's constantly you know, she's trying to dominate the dog because the dog is the only person that she thinks might be under her on the totem pole. And she's always trying, I mean, like and as far as I'm concerned, she's little Napoleon. Well, I'm already labeling my kid, right? I'm calling her little Napoleon all the time. So, and I figure I'll probably stop that when she gets out of her twos, but I don't know that. Maybe I'm creating a discipline right now where I'm labeling her for my own personal amusement, right, and the amusement of the other adults around, right? Not because of her, but just because I think it's funny to call her that. And I'm already not creating that discipline that Ria's talking about, which is, you know, like it's a discipline. We have to think of it not just like we don't take a magic pill and then one day we're like, oh, I'm going to talk to my kid in the way that totally reaches them and, like, you know, gives them space. It's a discipline over time.
Mosquitoes.
Yeah.
It's really important to, as we wrap up, end with that. None of us, I eat, breathe parenting, but this is not some place. Conscious parenting is not about being at the top of the mountain. There's no top of the mountain.
Right.
You climb 5 steps and you go back 3. You go 2 steps and you go back 1. Conscious parenting is saying every day I'm going to get on the mountain and I'm going to claw my way up through my life, claw my way up. That is what I see as conscientious parenting. And just one other thing is, as we say, I also have to recognize that while I might be highly conscious, this is an area that I'm highly conscious about, the labels, but I have to think about the energy. Energetically, what am I bringing in my nonverbal cues that's just showing up that my kids are reading on? And I don't know if I'm doing always a great job on that. I mean, I get it right sometimes, I don't get it right. So that's an area that I feel that I need to grow. So please don't think, you guys out there, that any of us are sitting on a pedestal telling you guys how to do it, because we're all on that mountain clawing our way up.
Yeah.
On that note, we are so glad. This topic was really fun to talk about. We certainly enjoyed it, and we'd love to hear your comments, so please leave them below. We'd love to hear what you're talking about, and stay tuned because we have a whole month of really exciting stuff your way, so listen in next week. Take care now.